Hello, I'm Sean Paul with Morning Star Missions. Thank you so much for stopping by and watching our video series on how to become a full-time missionary. You know, our prayer is that these become a massive blessing to you and get you started right in the mission field. If you want to contact me, feel free to do so. My email address is in the description of this YouTube video. If you want to network with fellow missionaries, we also have a link there to our Facebook group. Please join. We would love to have you. Make sure you subscribe to this channel because we're definitely going to be adding a lot more content in the future. And then the final note is that this video series is based off a book by the name of Pursuing the Call. The author is Daniel Lamastra, and he's a full-time missionary in El Salvador. Thank you so much for watching. Okay, Danny. Well, we're going to talk about maintaining personal spiritual health. This is something that's very vital because obviously if you're a missionary, you're going to want to maintain spiritual health. And a lot of times, I'm not going to say many missionaries, but some can come down and then all of a sudden they just kind of like disappear in the sense of spiritual health. You know, they don't maintain the spiritual health. All of a sudden now becoming a missionary is just kind of like a job, and they're not maintaining the spiritual health. And I don't know about you, and I really am impressed about your book because you really went into great detail, and it's quite evident you have a really close personal relationship with the Lord, and you value that, and you see how important that is. And I feel the same. It's just something that I have to have in my life because without that, maintaining that spiritual health, I could die very quickly spiritually down here because of just the onslaught of, you know, the culture, issues that you deal with. It's not as easy to conduct business down here as much as you would think, you know, in your own home country, dealing with language and so forth. So anyway, why don't you go ahead and share with us about maintaining your personal spiritual health?
Yeah, so there's a story in the Bible that really has heavily impacted my life, and it's in Exodus chapter 33. So this isn't usually a part of the Bible that we pull from when we're talking about personal spiritual health necessarily. We're pretty much getting into the law of Moses, right? But there's this story in Exodus 33 where the Israelites have built this calf, and Moses comes down from Mount Sinai. He slams the tablets that God had given him. They shatter. He's upset. He's angry. God's angry. All that whole story takes place. You've probably heard that story before. Mm-hmm. But after that, Moses goes up to Mount Sinai a second time because he'd shattered the tablets. So now he has to get those tablets with new tablets with those instructions again. And so Moses goes up, and as soon as he gets up there, the conversation between him and God kind of starts out on a very different tone in the first conversation. God doesn't jump right in this time to give him the instructions that's going to go on these new tablets. He instead poses a different question. Not a question, actually, a statement, I should say. But what God basically says is, Moses, I cannot deal with these people anymore. I'm paraphrasing, of course. If you want to know the exact wording, you can go to Exodus chapter 33. But he's saying basically, I can't deal with these people anymore. You go, take these people to the promised land. I'm going to make sure you get in. I'm going to take care of you along the way. You're going to be good to go. I'll defeat your enemies. Like basically any material blessing that you could possibly want, like God guarantees God guarantees Moses in that moment. Mm-hmm. Is, I'm going to take care of you. Like you're going to have all the blessings. You're going to have the leadership. You're going to be the top guy. You're going to defeat the enemies. Like everything's going to be good. But I'm not going with you because I can't deal with these people anymore. And I don't think that God ever really had the intention of not going with the Israelites. So I think what God is doing in this moment he's testing Moses' heart. He's trying to see how is Moses going to respond. I think that's really what's taking place here. And Moses' response is very, very powerful, in my opinion. And this is in verses 15 and 16. I'm going to read directly what he says. But Moses says, if your presence does not go with us, do not send us from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth? Now, what's interesting about this statement is when he says, do not send us up from here if your presence doesn't go with us. Where are they? They're in the middle of the desert. They're nomads. They don't have anything with them. There's no water. They're eating the same food every day, which is manna, except for the rare occasion when God sends them quail. They're not in a great situation. And the situation that God is promising Moses that he can have is a significantly more comfortable situation. But Moses says, I would rather be in this lousy situation that I'm in right now, but have your presence with me, than go into this much more comfortable situation, but not have your presence with me. And the conviction that Moses had, I think it teaches us something, and that is that our first and foremost priority should always be having that connection with God's presence over and above what we can accomplish in ministry. Because Moses would have accomplished a lot more in ministry, taking the Israelites into the promised land, than staying there in the desert. But Moses understood that the principal thing, the most important thing, is having that relationship with God and having that connection with God's presence. There's another story in the New Testament that actually illustrates this same point. It's another story that has challenged me a lot. It's the story of when Jesus visits Mary and Martha at their house. And basically, to give kind of an overview of the story, again, you can look it up if you want to see exactly how it's worded in the scripture. But to kind of give an overview of that story, Jesus is visiting these two sisters, Mary and Martha, and Martha is super busy trying to make sure all the preparations are good, basically being a good host. She's taking care of all the details, all the arrangements. You got to remember, Jesus had the disciples with him. So this was a big group that was arriving to her house. And she's just spinning her wheels, doing all these things, making sure that all the preparations are right. And Mary, she's not helping with any of it. She is just hanging with Jesus and the disciples, right? Martha's busy doing all this stuff, and Martha gets annoyed. And Martha comes into the room, and she says, Jesus, tell Mary that she needs to help me. Basically like the original Tattletale, but adults, right? And Jesus actually has a response that I don't think Martha was expecting. And the response is, actually, Mary has chosen better than you have, because what Mary's doing is more important than what you're doing. And what Jesus is basically saying is that being in God's presence is more important than anything that you can do for God. Or another way of saying this, and this isn't my words, I'm copying from how somebody else has said this, but ministry is about doing ministry with God, not doing it for God. Mm-hmm. And so that's really, I think, a foundational concept that has to be established right out of the get-go before we talk about personal spiritual health. And I don't know if you have anything you want to comment on that before I move on to the rest of what I want to say.
No, go ahead.
All right. So as far as personal spiritual health goes, I think that when you're in ministry, whether it's a missionary, whether it's a pastor, whatever the case may be, there's always a tendency to justify not maintaining personal spiritual disciplines because of the fact that you are 40 hours a week in ministry, right? So you can easily say, I don't need to spend time in prayer because I just led a prayer meeting. I don't need to spend time reading the Bible because I'm reading the Bible all week as I'm preparing my sermon. And things like that. I think it's very easy to justify. One of the things that I've observed is that there are missionaries who don't get involved in a local church while they're on the field. I'm not going to throw out a percentage or anything like that, but there are missionaries that do that. They come and they say, I'm in ministry all week, so I don't need to be involved in a local church. And that's just one example that I've seen personally. But anytime that you start to neglect spiritual disciplines that God has designed for your own personal spiritual health, that is something that is going to take its toll on you. It's going to take its toll on your ministry as well. It's going to take its toll on everything, because we like to separate out life, personal life, ministry life. But really, we just have one life, and it's all kind of related. So 5 spiritual disciplines that everybody should have. This wouldn't even just apply to missionaries. This does apply to everybody. But we'll go through them. So first of all, the time in the Bible every day. Having that time where you're studying the Bible to study the Bible, not to prepare for a Bible study or to prepare a sermon or to share a scripture with somebody else. The time when you're studying the Bible to study the Bible just for you personally. That's number 1. Number 2, prayer. And again, I'm not talking about having a prayer meeting with your ministry team. I'm talking about, and you should do that, but I'm talking specifically about that time between you and God. Mm-hmm. Jesus modeled this great. When we think about who was it that probably didn't need prayer, if anybody doesn't need prayer, right? Jesus, because Jesus was God, right? But Jesus was constantly pulling away from the crowds, from the disciples, from everybody. And it specifically says the reason why he was doing that was to pray. And there's a number of occasions in the Gospels where that is mentioned. And what's interesting is that the times when Jesus tends to do this, if you actually study the Gospel closely, are generally the times when he's having the greatest level of success in ministry, when he's having the crowds around him, when everybody's getting excited and he seems like he's really growing momentum. And a lot of times, I think that's a good example for us, because a lot of times when we're in ministry and we think that we have a lot going on, you know, our ministry is really clicking, we're booming, we're reaching people with the gospel, we're seeing results. Those are the times when we tend to say, man, we got to hit the ground 100 to capitalize on this moment, right? Mm-hmm. And that's when we let some things slip. But Jesus, it was in those moments where Jesus was making an intentional effort to pull away and spend time with God. So he set that example for us. On the same lines of prayer, number 3 would be fasting. Fasting is something that is not, in my opinion, as common today as it was potentially in Bible times. Obviously, I did not live in Bible times, but there's a lot of examples of fasts in the Bible, and tough fasts, like Esther, for example. 3 days, no eating. That's tough. I think nowadays we tend to not take fasting as seriously, or at least not fast food. To the same degree that it was done in the Bible. And I'm not saying that you have to do 3 days like they did in Esther. But fasting is definitely a spiritual discipline. It's talked about both the Old Testament and the New Testament. And it's something that we should practice, that we shouldn't just neglect. Now, the one caveat to this is when you are brand new in the country, your digestive system is probably going to be doing a whirlwind. Mm-hmm. And so when you're brand new to the country and your stomach's already dealing with a lot, you may want to not make that the time of fasting. I would say fast a lot before you go. Maybe do it once a week, or whatever you want to do. And then, after your stomach is fully adjusted, get back to the discipline of fasting again. But that's the one caveat that I would say, is that it may not be the wisest thing to do when you're brand new to a new country, because your stomach is already going through a lot. That's the 3rd discipline. The 5th discipline is church involvement. And this is one that I have seen missionaries neglect more than probably any of the other ones that I've mentioned up to this point. Because, like I said, it's so easy to justify not being involved in a local church because you're doing ministry 24/7. And I would also say that, with technology nowadays, it's very easy to say, well, I'm just going to watch my church back home in the States or wherever you're from via YouTube. And, that's nothing wrong with doing that. I do that a lot. And some seasons of my life, especially, I'm like every week listening to their sermon. But I still think it's important to be involved in local church, because there's a lot of, the purpose of local church goes beyond just listening to a sermon or listening to a worship set. There's a lot more to it than just that you can't get when you're just connected via YouTube or whatever the case may be. And so I would say get involved in the local church, make that a priority. And then the last spiritual discipline, and this is one that most people don't think of as a spiritual discipline, but I think that it should be classified as a spiritual discipline, and that is rest. When we read the Old Testament, when we read the law of Moses, it's interesting that in the Ten Commandments, one of the Ten Commandments is rest. Now, in theory, like we think of the Ten Commandments as like the 10 most important commands in the Bible. Obviously, Jesus said the most important command is, love your neighbor love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. And neither of those are in the Ten Commandments. So it may be a little bit erroneous for us to say that the Ten Commandments are the most important commandments. But whatever the case may be, we tend to think of that as like the top commands of the Old Testament. We teach in Sunday school, all that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that alongside of all these really like what we would consider big sins, right? Don't murder, don't commit adultery, like all these things. One of the things that includes is that you better make sure to honor the Sabbath. And that's something that God took so seriously that if you actually read through capital punishment, like the laws, what were the sins in the law of Moses that could be punished by death? That was actually one of them. And we actually have an example in the Old Testament of an Israelite being stoned to death because he violated the Sabbath. Now, I'm not saying that that's what we should do nowadays. Yeah. Obviously, we could talk about hermeneutics and a lot of different things. I don't believe that we are supposed to stone people who don't honor the Sabbath in 2021. But what this shows us is how seriously God takes this concept of rest. And when you are, like I said already, when you're really gaining a lot of momentum in ministry, that pressure is on to say, man, we're just going to hit it 100 and capitalize on this momentum. If you're not taking time to rest on a regular basis, then it is going to catch up with you sooner rather than later and have an impact on your ministry and on a whole lot of other aspects of your life as well. Mm-hmm. So those are, I guess, the 5 spiritual disciplines that I would mention that missionaries definitely want to make sure, and all Christians, this isn't just missionaries, but we're obviously talking about missionaries in this video. So these would be the 5 spiritual disciplines that I would say every missionary needs to make sure that they are keeping.
Yeah. And, one thing that you had, or we had in the outline was to stay connected to a spiritual leader in your life. I think, and we talk about having a pastor over your life, because I think sometimes there's just this tendency to be like a lone wolf, lone ranger kind of attitude. And it's just like, I don't need accountability. I don't need anybody to hold me accountable. And we talk about that. And I think it's very important to ensure that you have a spiritual leader in your life. And, it's not something that like, you call them once a week or anything. I mean, if that's the arrangement you have with your pastor, then, fine. But I'm just saying that, like in my case, I've been serving the Lord for 31 years. And, I called my pastor here probably about 3 or 4 months ago. I was just kind of going through a dry spell, like you put in here as far as in the outline. And, I talked to my pastor. I said, look, I need some help. I need to kind of relook at what I'm doing down here. What am I doing wrong? What am I doing right? And I mean, he was from the outside looking in, and, he made some adjustments, and it was huge. And it was a massive blessing to myself as far as personally. So I think, making sure you still stay connected to your pastor. Now bear in mind, there's some people that come down here, they join a local church and they have a foreign national, or they have the actual, someone from the country to become their pastor. I mean, obviously that's fine as well. But yeah, I mean, I just think that there are some people that just have this attitude, like I'm a lone ranger. I can do it on my own. I don't need church. I don't need to be a part of that. I can watch church online. And as much as church is important to me, my home church, yes, we watch that, but yes, we're very active in the local church here as well. As far as the ministry that we do, we minister in the churches that we are connected to here locally. So, I mean, I just think it's extremely important that we develop a discipline and we maintain that discipline. And it kind of goes back to what I said, pioneering your work, because I don't think your organization is messaging you once a week. Danny, did you go to church? Danny, are you studying your Bible? Danny, did you pray today? Are they doing that?
No.
No, they're not. Huh?
It's not that much. there.
What'd you say?
Any organization is on the missionaries that much. Like,
Yeah, exactly. So they're not. And so, that's an area that you're going to have to be self-motivating and self-disciplined to maintain that spiritual health. Because again, I promise you, if God sent you to the foreign lands to be a missionary and you're not maintaining your spiritual health, I would probably almost bet you'll be going home early, or you will not be maintaining or doing what God has called you to do in the mission field. I mean, I don't know if you agree with that, but I
oh
just
yeah,
think it's a massive hindrance.
that brings up actually a very interesting point. And this isn't necessarily a spiritual discipline, but it's something I talk about in the book. And that is that when you are going through a season where there's a lot of pressure on you, which is a season that every missionary is going to experience.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're in a different country, you're speaking a different language, you're with a different culture, you feel the pressure of having to communicate with your donors, you feel the pressure of the ministry, like just everything. Whenever you're in that type of season, you're always more susceptible to temptation.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not a coincidence that in the story of when Jesus was tempted, there's two times in the Bible where Jesus appears to be tempted. The first is when he's tempted directly, right? And that was after 40 days of prayer and fasting. And then at the end of that story, now, first of all, let me just say it's interesting. It's not the beginning of the 40 days of prayer and fasting that he's tempted. It's at the end because he hasn't eaten for 40 days, right? Like I said, it's when we have that most pressure on us that we're most susceptible to temptation. But after that, it says that Satan left him until an opportune time. Now, when is the opportune time? The opportune time, in my interpretation of Scripture, at least the next time that we see in Scripture where it would appear that Jesus is being tempted, would be the Garden of Gethsemane, when he's really wrestling with, man, I don't know if I want to go to the cross. Like, I don't know if I want to do this. And again, that is a moment where he is under incredible pressure. And all of us, it's part of the human condition. When you are under pressure, when you are going through a tough time, when you're feeling depressed, when you're feeling lonely, all that, that's when you're most susceptible to temptation. And so as a missionary, knowing off out of the gates that's something that you're going to experience, that pressure. You need to, be on your guard and guard against that temptation. And going back to something else you said, it is very beneficial to have people in your life that you can call when you're having a rough time and you need to just, let somebody else in to your experience.
Yeah.
You need to have spiritual mentors. You need to have pastoral figures, and that can include your pastor. It can include other people that are spiritual mentors in your life that aren't necessarily your pastor, but whatever the case may be. Like Sean said, it doesn't have to be that you have a formal, we're going to talk every Tuesday at 3, but you better have some people in your life that that if you're going through something, you can call them and loop them in and have them, pouring into your life. Because if you don't have that, if you're trying to be a lone ranger, it's going to create problems for you.
Yeah.
In the book of Acts, there's a story of a man named Apollo. He's not mentioned a whole lot in the book of Acts, so I don't want to go into too much detail and embellish the story. But what we do see is that when Paul first encounters Apollo is operating as a lone ranger, basically. He's going about, he's preaching everything, but he's not doing it with anybody. And that was not common in the New Testament. The model that we see in the New Testament is generally, at least two people, Paul and Barnabas, Paul and Silas, Barnabas and John Mark, the apostles collectively, the 7 elders who are appointed to be deacons, et cetera, et cetera. It's not common that we see just one person out on their own doing their own thing. And so Apollo is this guy, he's out on his own doing his own thing. And the result of that is that when Paul actually encounters him, Paul finds that he's preaching some bad theology. Mm-hmm. And he has the greatest intentions in the world. He doesn't realize it. But the reason he doesn't realize it is because he's not in community. So he's not being sharpened, like iron sharpens iron. And so, whatever the case may be, it may not be in your case that you're preaching bad theology, but there's always going to be consequences when you're operating as a lone ranger. And, it's always going to hurt your ministry. It's always going to hurt you personally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I just think that, it's just biblical to have a spiritual leadership over your life. And I just think that if you're down here, in the mission field by yourself and you have no spiritual authority over your life, I'm sorry. I think you're wrong. I mean, I'm just going to say it. Some people might get upset at that statement, but you're 100%. I believe you're wrong. I think we all need spiritual authority in our lives. I've been serving Jesus for 31 years, and I've had a pastor over my life for 31 years, and I still have a pastor over my life today. And he can put a boot in my rear right now and correct me, and I accept it because I need that in my life. So, and especially, I don't know, you might be able to say, no, I don't agree, but I think being single can obviously open doors, more of a temptation as well, because I mean, I have a spouse that can kind of keep me in check, and the same thing with her as well. We keep each other in check, so I think sometimes being single can add to the war if you don't have the spiritual authority over your life.
Yeah.
So, so anyway, well, brother, I really appreciate it. I think we've covered everything here on maintaining spiritual health. And, I greatly appreciate your wisdom and insight in these training videos. So this will be our last video. So anyway, thank you so much, Danny. I greatly appreciate it. And I do definitely encourage anybody to get the book, because obviously it's just a more in-depth study on what we're covering here. We're just basically kind of going over the surface of what Danny taught in these books, or in this book. So anyway.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And hopefully, this can help you guys who are watching to formulate some thoughts and to have a good start to your missionary journey.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Danny. Have a good one.
You too.
Bye-bye.